A few weeks ago, I saw a tweet that made me lose my mind. It was about a new weak aura that analyzes enemy cast bars and then predicts when your target is most likely to juke. I'm willing to bet that some of you out there are thinking, hey, that's cool, I want that, while others are ready to write a 5-paragraph essay about how add-ons are ruining PvP. It's impossible to ignore the fact that add-ons are a controversial topic in World of Warcraft these days, and it's gotten to the point where the game director on WoW has considered stepping in to stop the arms race. So, how did we get here? Today, we will be taking a step back into the past to look at the add-ons that changed the way PvP is played, and at the players who, without knowing it, would change the course of WoW Arena forever. And instead of only looking at the past, we're also going to be looking into the future, predicting the direction we think add-ons might be heading. It's time to open Pandora's box. Love it or hate it, this is the story of add-ons in WoW PvP. Now, to tell the story of add-ons in Arena, we need to start at the very beginning, the Burning Crusade. The early days of WoW Arena were, well, chaotic. Looking back, most PvPers looked like noobs running in circles, and there were random tornadoes knocking players up and down into Grand Arena. This is some of the earliest footage of WoW Arena ever in the TBC pre-patch, with players in Tier 3 Naxxramas gear from the perspective of Collective. Now, we want you to remember this name, because he will eventually become a BlizzCon champion, and his name is going to come up a lot throughout this video. But let's go back to the earliest days of Arena. Notice here how there are 0 enemy arena frames. Fast forward to the expansion, and eventually everyone is using this new add-on called Proximo in order to keep track of enemy players. This should immediately remind you of an add-on that is still being used today. Out of every add-on in PvP history, Gladius has truly stood the test of time. Now, just as an Easter egg, Proximo is the name of the character who trains Maximus in the movie Gladiator, and Gladius is the name of a Roman sword. I know these things because I am the biggest PvP nerd in the world. Anyway, even if you don't use Gladius now, you probably use one of its many copycats, and we tend to take them all for granted since Gladius was the first add-on to truly revolutionize Arena for 2 big reasons. For one, Gladius was the first widely adopted add-on that showed the cooldown of enemy trinkets, which even back then was a really big deal since there weren't as many defensive cooldowns in the game, and seeing trinket timers allowed players to start thinking more about win conditions instead of simply dealing random damage. The other major innovation was that Gladius displayed diminishing returns on enemy players, which was more important than just seeing enemy trinkets. Seeing DRs for the first time meant that players could be more precise with crowd control. For many classes, especially rogues, you could not possibly play Arena at a competitive level without tracking DRs. In fact, for the longest time, Blizzard had actually banned all add-ons for LAN tournament play, which meant the best comps were the ones that weren't as reliant on tracking DRs. And it wasn't until this ban was lifted that a rogue would ever win BlizzCon for the first time. Another huge reason why Gladius has stood the test of time is because it is relatively plug and play. One of the biggest problems with many add-ons today is that they're barely useful straight out of the box, and require years of game knowledge and countless hours to set up properly. One theme we will be repeating throughout this video is that the gap between beginner and more advanced players just keeps on growing. We've closed this gap for thousands of players with our add-on, which gives any player a world-class UI within seconds. This is one of the many reasons why Skillcapped offers a rating gain guarantee, because we promise that you will see significant rating gains while using our service. Along with our add-on, Skillcapped is home to thousands of Arena guides that teach every PvP fundamental, including class courses, which guide you step by step on every detail on how to master your class. So if you want to reach your true potential, be sure to use the links below for a special discount to get started. Now, just a second ago, we told you to remember the name Collective, and this won't be the last time we mention his name. Now, if you pay attention carefully, you'll notice something familiar on his screen. It looks like omnibar, but it's not. This was called Interrupt Bar, an add-on made by Collective himself, which would eventually evolve into the omnibar we all know today. Enemy cooldown tracking is impossible for any person to do on their own. Just imagine trying to keep track of 3 different kicks and a bunch of disjointed cooldowns all at once. Omnibar is arguably the most powerful add-on in PvP because it allows you to do the impossible. Even in its earliest form, when most players simply tracked interrupts, knowing when a kick is available or when it's safe to freecast is enormously useful information. As the game slowly progressed toward the scripted era of PvP, enemy cooldown tracking became even more powerful. Knowing what defensive cooldowns stood in their path allowed players to carve out precise win conditions for the first time. Instead of thinking about the game in the moment, players could now think ahead, and by knowing when crowd control or offensive CDs were ready, players could make smarter cooldown trades, enabling defensive comps to win by attrition. Time after time, it's become clear that one of the most broken mechanics in WoW is cooldown reduction. Ineffable Truth from Battle for Azeroth was not only broken because it allowed cooldowns to reset faster, but it also messed up cooldown tracking for the enemy team. In any case, Omnibar opened up the possibility to make consistent outplays as PvP became increasingly more scripted. There's a reason why we've made entire videos dedicated to this single add-on, and why our Omnibar profile was carefully optimized over 10 years. It literally changes the way you make decisions. It is at the core of outplaying any opponent. Now, for almost a decade, most PvP UIs would simply feature two add-ons: Gladius in place of Blizzard's suboptimal arena frames, and Interrupt Bar, eventually evolving into Omnibar in Warlords of Draenor. But during this time, there was one lightweight add-on that was so good that it would eventually become part of the game by default. The add-on was Lose Control, and it would solve a growing problem in PvP: awareness. WoW was becoming more and more complicated as classes gained an infinite number of procs and cooldowns, adding to clutter that made important information harder to notice. Lose Control was simple. All it did was magnify CC debuffs on various parts of your screen. Instead of needing to scan through tiny icons, information was presented in your face. It was impossible to ignore. It was a change that seemed small on its surface, but yielded a much bigger impact than most players would realize. Lose Control was so good that eventually Blizzard would bake in parts of its functionality directly into the default UI, through loss of control alerts, a setting that no serious player should play without. Lose Control would eventually be abandoned and would be replaced with big debuffs, with the newest standard being Omni Auras, which continues to give players more awareness in a crucial time period when the buff and debuff frames are impossible to navigate. At this point, we're certain that some of you out there are confused as to why we haven't mentioned the most divisive add-on in PvP history. Trust us, we're getting there. But before we fully open Pandora's box, let's go back to Collective, because you might have noticed something. Near the top of his screen is a notification that the enemy warrior used Spell Reflect. Does this remind you of anything? A decade before weak auras would become mainstream, Collective created Spell Alerter, allowing players to have a heads-up view on what was happening in Arena. As the game was becoming more complex, players became addicted to tracking more and more information, and Spell Alerter would evolve with two more add-ons in order to create the weak auras we know today. One of those add-ons was Power Auras, which allowed players to display on-screen visuals to represent various buffs or procs. Once again, this should immediately remind you of a feature that is part of the default UI today, with on-screen animations representing unique, class-specific buffs. After Power Auras, some players would start using Tell Me When, which gave even more freedom on what information could be tracked. But let's pause here. Despite their strength, few players in PvP would actually use these add-ons, and up until Shadowlands, most PvP UIs were relatively minimalist. Meanwhile, starting in Mists of Pandaria, a new add-on was gaining traction in the PvE world: Weak Auras. This add-on could do everything Tell Me When could do, but better. Weak Auras could solve any problem that players could think of, and the best guilds at the time were using this add-on to push cutting-edge content. But while this was happening in the PvE world, players in PvP were happy using their fairly minimalist UIs. But then, something would happen which would change PvP forever. Shadowlands would include some of the highest burst damage of all time, with players dying 100 to 0 within a single global. This was due in part to critical strike damage being buffed with the release of the expansion, years after being nerfed in Warlords of Draenor. Couple this with the fact that a global pandemic meant that add-on restrictions in tournaments would be lifted, and the floodgates were open for innovation. Leading the way was Team Liquid, coming off the back of their 2018 BlizzCon win. Mez would develop one of the most popular weak auras of all time. It was a complete package, instantly notifying players with both visual and audio notifications when any cooldown was pressed, which helped solve the problem of getting one-shot in Arena. Now, if the story ended here, nobody would care, since Collective had already figured this out more than 10 years earlier in the Burning Crusade. But unlike Spell Alerter, Weak Auras was a blank slate, and it could be used to do almost anything, including replacing the entire interface from the ground up. Circling back to where we started, the possibilities of Weak Auras are endless. The line is quickly getting blurred between player and computer, with Weak Auras being able to play the game for you. This is why add-on functionalities need to eventually be clawed back. Content in WoW is designed with add-ons in mind, so as the technology gets better, the content needs to become harder, once again increasing the gap between players. Now that Pandora's box has been opened, what do we think about the future of add-ons? It's pretty clear that the solo experience is dominating WoW PvP, and we've already seen UIs adapt to this new environment, with add-ons like Omni CD, which allows players to see their teammates' cooldowns in a game mode without communication. And if we think there is one part of the UI that players are sleeping on, it's definitely nameplates. A bad nameplate profile makes the game borderline unplayable by cluttering the screen with unnecessary information. A good nameplate profile can do the job of 5 different add-ons all at once, making the game easier to understand. Trust us, we're not the only ones to point out that your UI might be destroying your potential. Whether you love them or hate them, add-ons are changing the metagame, and your potential as a player might depend on the amount of time you're willing to invest fine-tuning your UI. Fortunately though, if you're a SkillCap subscriber, we've already done all this work for you, saving you countless hours. Just head over to the SkillCap website using the link in the description below for a special discount. Then select the War Within. Navigate to the Addons tab in the top right, enter your battle.net, and then hit confirm to generate your premium code. Then you'll be able to paste this code into your SkillCapped add-on to import complete profiles for every add-on you would ever need to reach the highest ratings. Right out of the box, everything is already pre-configured with PvP optimized settings, so you can immediately get to gaming. And best of all, it works for every single spec. That's going to be it for now. Thank you all for watching. See you soon.